Hey guys, welcome to this session on Python nested loops tutorial by Intellipaat. Nested loops is a bit of a complicated topic when you get started with Python. So keeping that in mind, we've come up with this session to help you understand it better. So let's take a look at the agenda for the session and understand what exactly are the things that we'll be discussing in this session. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell icon to never miss another update. Also click on the like button if you like our content and click and put down the comments if you want to make us cover some other topic next. So let's take a look at the agenda for the session. We'll begin by taking a look at loops. Loops are at the core of what we want to cover here. So unless we have a fundamental understanding of what loops are, discussing nested loops and how they fit into the entire Python ecosystem is going to be a little difficult. So we demystify what loops are right at the beginning so that we're all on the same page. Then we'll take a look at types of loops in Python. So Python, like many other languages that are available for us to use, has different kinds of loops. So we'll try and understand what are the kinds of loops available for us to take a look at. And then after that, once we have covered different kinds of loops, we will then move on and take a look at nested loops. Now, nested loops are concepts that can only be learned once we understand the kinds of loops that are available and what loops are. After we have discussed all the things that are needed for loops, nested loops, and what different types of loops, we'll then move on and have a hands-on of nested loops in which we'll try and solve some complicated problems using nested loops. And these problems can be real world scenarios as well. In case you are not familiar with any of these concepts, if you're completely new to programming and you just want to take a look at how these things work, you are welcome to stick around. And at the end of the presentation, we'll guide you through some of the resources through which you can learn these things. Also, well, after you learn these things, we also have questions that you can ask. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can look into chat box and ask any questions that you have. So let's begin and take a look at what are loops. So what exactly are loops? A loop is a programming concept in which we perform certain tasks over and over until a specific condition is met. So when we're trying to learn how to write code, the first things that we do is we write programming statements. Statements that perform some tasks, such as reading a file, looking at a folder, writing something on the console, getting input from the user. There could be many other tasks. Now, when we're doing that, there are times that we have to write some code that needs to be executed again and again. So for instance, a very simple concept would be if you're trying to create a command line program which takes in a number as an input and prints out the table or the multiplication table of a particular number. So if the number is 3, then you print out 3 multiplied by 1 is equal to till 3 multiplied by 10 equals to, and you write out all of these things. Now one way of doing it would be to writing out all the print statements, but as you can see that there's a lot of repetition there. You're writing almost exactly the same thing, only two things are changing are the numbers from which you're multiplying 3 by and the output, which can be easily calculated. So you can solve this problem by either typing it out all by yourself, so you write 10 print statements and everything is hard coded there, or you could use a loop. Loop is a fundamental programming concept. Every programming language has loops in them, no matter how primitive the programming language is. And the concept of a loop is quite simple. All you're meant to do is print things or do things until a condition is met. In our case, the condition would be until we reach the number 10. So we start with number 1, we print 3 multiplied by 1 equals to 3. Then we move on to 3 multiplied by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we move on to 10. A thing to remember is that we have to understand that we need to make sure that the condition is met. So we need to make sure that we are not skipping over numbers so that in such a way that we miss 10 and jump directly to 11. If that's the case, then the loop will run forever. And another thing that we have to understand is that when we are talking about conditions, there are certain loops in which we don't have to specify these conditions, and then there are certain loops where we have. So we'll take a look at those as well when we're discussing types of loops. So let's take a look at different kinds of loops that are available to us. So there are two main kinds of loops in Python. First is for loop, then there's while loop. If you ever programmed in any other language other than Python, such as C++, Java, C Sharp, and any other kind of language. You might have come across loops such as do while loops as well. Or in Ruby, there are also language features that allow you to use the keyword until to inside a loop. So as you know, every language has a different kind of feature, but do while loops are not there in Python. Now you can augment for loops and while loops to do stuff that a do while loop does. So what exactly is a for loop? Well, a for loop is basically a loop in Python. You basically just specify a range or you specify some values, and the loop will take care of iterating over each of the values, and then just you just specify the code that you want to run when the loop is run for multiple times. For loop is great for when you're working with iterable content. Iterable basically means containers such as lists, sets, dictionaries, and we'll take a look at those in a moment as well. And on the other hand, we have while loops. While loops are a bit more involved. So in while loops, you have to manually take care of a lot of things. It gives you a lot more control over the execution of the loop, but with that level of access and power, you do get certain responsibilities. One of those is you have to figure out the termination condition, you have to update the loop variable, and you have to make sure that the termination condition is met. So for instance, if you're trying to write a program in which you are supposed to loop over 10 numbers, you have to firstly initialize a variable at a starting point that is less than 10, and then you want the ending condition to be 10, and then for after each iteration or at the end of each iteration, you have to increment the loop variable. And don't worry if this sounds a little complicated, we'll take a look at that in a moment. Also, in a while loop, if you have ever come across a do while loop, it's quite similar to while loop. Only problem or the only difference is that it's an exit controlled loop. So what that basically means is that there are entry controlled loops and then there are exit controlled loops. Entry controlled loops are loops in which before starting we check whether the condition that is supposed to be met is already met or not. In do while loops, we don't check the condition until the loop is executed. So depends on how you wish to execute your code and what kind of situations you want to deal with. However, do while loops are not that useful. So in Python you don't use do while loops. Now let's take a look at what are nested loops. So nested loops is the brunt of this particular series, what we're trying to cover here. So what are nested loops? Well, nested loops are loops or a kind of loop which is nested or encapsulated in other loops. So when you have an if condition and you put another if condition inside that if condition, that's called a nested if condition. Similarly, we have a loop inside which we put another loop, and that is called a nested loop. You can mix and match the types of loops that you're using, but overall you're supposed to use these conditions. So that's what a nested loop is. Now, a nested loop is used to deal with data or operations that are multi-dimensional. So if you're looping over a list of numbers, then basically what you can do is just print out these numbers. But if you're looping over not a list of numbers, but a list of numbers, so each list is contained within a bigger list. So that would be a problem because a single loop is only going to give you access to one loop or one list, and then you would loop over that as well. So that's what nested loops do. They allow you to loop over multi-dimensional data. And not just that, there are operations that you need to perform in a multi-dimensional way as well, such as you need to request a particular web service 3 times a day, and for each time when you perform that, you have to perform some other task such as logging or notifying some services and many other kinds of tasks. So all of this is taken care of by nested loops. So now let's have a hands-on in which we'll take a look at nested loops. Just as a side note, in this we will take a look at nested loops in Python. Nested loops can be implemented in any language of your choice, but Python is one of the most popular ones, and we recommend using Python when you're trying to learn programming right at the start. Also, if you don't know Python, don't worry, we'll show you the code right now, but if it doesn't make much sense, then you can wait till the end of the presentation where we'll guide you through some of the resources. So let's take a look at that. For this, I am using Jupyter Notebook. In case you don't have Jupyter Notebook, you only have Python installed on your system, what you can do is you can run the Python code by writing the code, saving it inside a loops.py file. Py is the extension or for a Python code program, and then run it from a command line. So open the command line in the folder where you want to run it and type the file name and the program name. So type Python, then loops.py, and when you run it, it will execute the code and show you the output on the screen. I'm using Jupyter Notebook because it's easier for me to just show you what the output is right where I'm typing it. So let's begin with the loops first. So a loop, there are two kinds of loops that we have discussed so far: for loops and while loops. So as I told you, in for loops, you by default you can let go of certain control and you can just focus on solving the problem. So let's say I want to print 10 numbers. All I have to do is for num in range 0 to 10. In case you're not familiar with these things, what I'm saying is create a range of numbers from 0 to 10, which means 0 to 9 numbers will be given to me. It's exclusive of the end, so right before 10 it will stop. So it goes to 9, takes a look at the next number, it's the ending number, and it stops at 9. Now I want, for each of these, I want to print now. And by the way, this, since it's in Python, I have to, if I'm putting it on a new line, then I have to indent it with 4 tabs, or with a tab of 4 spaces, or just 2 spaces, however you wish to do it. If I run this, as you can see, it printed all the numbers. Now if I had to do it on my own, then I would have had to print 0, then print 1, and then go along and print all of that. But since I can use loops, this just works. Now the reason why I said that this is going to be a little if you have to lose a little bit of control is because now you don't have access to the loop variable, so you don't know whether 0 is being executed, 1 is being executed, 2 is being executed. It is being executed in sequence, but you don't know the number that is executing it. So if I were to change it to, let's say, instead of this, if I wanted all the even numbers, I go with 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and I just, what I am concerned with here is just printing the number. When I were to compare it with a while loop, let me just, index starts from 0, and while index is less than 10, print index and index plus equals 1, and this is where we get it. It's a significantly larger amount of code. I have to write 4 lines of code here. I only had to write 2, but we get the raw index here. So if I want to print something such as, instead of doing it this way, instead of getting the numbers, I can just print index plus 2. This is where we get it. And if I were to, instead of adding it here, I just print index plus, print index here, index plus equals 1, and now I get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. If I were to do it down here, I'll get this. I can also do it this way and remove this, and it works the same. So I have a lot more control over my loop variables, how the variables are being manipulated, how I can do with this. This could be a little complicated. If you don't want to get it that complicated, then I recommend sticking with the for loops. Now, the reason why there are two kinds of loops apart from the level of control is that for loops are really good with containers. Containers basically a group of values. So if I were to create a list, values equals to, and I'll create a list of let me just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, and 9. So if I were to print values, as you can see, these are the numbers. But if I wanted to loop over this, let's do it with both for loops and while loops. So for value in values, print values, value. Yeah, that's where you get the numbers. Now the same thing if I had to do with while loop, I can do it but it will take a little bit more work. Index is less than length of values, print values of index, index plus equals 1. Yeah, now it works. Now the issue here is many a times what people do is they forget this last portion. And if that happens, then we run into a problem called infinite loop, which basically just stalls our interpreter and keeps running again and again and again and again and again. Because we're not incrementing the value, what it does is that it will take a look at the values, print the value at the zeroth index, which is 1. So what it does is it will print 1, 1, and 1, and all the time it will take a look at, okay, is 0 less than, we have 9 numbers, so is 0 less than 9, it is, print 1. Then we go ahead, is 0 less than 9, it is, print 1, print 1, print 1, print 1, print 1, and it keeps going, and nothing happens. So just make sure that when you're doing this, you understand that there are variables that you have to set and unset, and if you forget, then your computer might run into a infinite loop problem and you would have to terminate the program yourself. So that's with loops. Now if we were to discuss nested loops, that's going to be the same thing that we have done here. Let me just remove this. Now, so the same thing that we had done earlier, if I had to use a nested loop to perform certain tasks, let's say that instead of it being a list, it was a nested list. So if I had 1, 2, 3, then we had 4, 5, 6, and we had 7, 8, and we had 9. So as you can see, lists are of different sizes, so we don't know how many times we want to run the loops. Now what I have to do is for value in values, and now I want to, for each time I'll get access to one of these lists. So first time I'll get access to a list of 3 values, second time access of list with 3 values, then 2 values, then 1 value. So if I were to print values, this is what I get. If I were to print value, this is what I would get. I have not run this code. Yeah, now I run this, and this is what I would get. So all the values are there. If I want to print each of these values, then I would have to for num in value, and now if I went to print number, I'll get this. But it's not very clear that these numbers are in list because everything is printed one after the other. So what are the numbers that are grouped inside a particular list? Well, we can do it by just doing it this way. And then when the loop ends, I want to print a new line, and that's about it. So we have 1, 2, and 3. These are in the new list. Then 4, 5, 6. These are in the new list. And 7, 8. These are part of this list. And then there's 9. Another thing you can do is instead of putting space, you can put a comma. And now every bit of list is there that we can use. This is useful, but let's try something else. So if I were to do the same thing with a while loop, it's going to be quite easy. Just type in while, and I have to first do the same thing where index is equal to 0. Index is equal to 0 and index is less than the length of values. When you get the length of values, all I want to do now is and again I can do a while loop. So while, and again I can just do new index, you can call it new index, or I can just call it I for now, while I is less than length of values index, and I just print values index I, and I have to increment I and after the loop ends, I have to increment index, and if I run this, hopefully it will work. It does. Now, if I were to again do the same thing, I have to put it here, and this works as well. And the problem here is that I've not put a new line. So as you can see, quite a bit of code to implement the same thing. It could be considered logical to do it this way. You could also argue that it is not logical to do it this way. There are better ways. Depends on how you want to do it. If you want to have greater control over how things are happening underneath the hood, then while loops are better. So that's one way. Also, another thing I would like to mention is that nested loops aren't the only way of dealing with this thing. There are other ways of doing it as well, such as a recursive function. A recursive function is useful. The problem with recursive functions, though, is that they are not useful in the sense that when we are using recursive functions, we run into a problem called stack space issue. A stack space basically means that when you're running a recursive function, you're calling that same function again and again and again. And sometimes your computer runs out of memory because it's storing the function call and each time the variables inside a function. And in Python, as far as I'm aware, it takes you around, I think it takes you around 10,000 lines of 10,000 function calls to get to the limit. But anyways, that's one way of thinking about it. So if you want to take a look at recursive functions, let me just show you. Let me just rerun all of them so that's clear. Let me just call it print list index end or values. Now, if I check if index is less than length of values, or I could also check is greater than or equal to values, then I'll just return out of it. This is called a base condition. Else I will print index values of index and print next, and then I will call the same function, but this time I'll do something index plus 1 and values. So after doing this, all I have to do is call the print list function. Its index is 0, numbers are, and I run this and you get the output. So this is how you can create a list of values for yourself. Depends on how you wish to do it. Recursive functions work as well, but they run into a problem. So, and many of programmers don't like to use recursive functions, although they do make a code lot simpler, because I could implement this in 3 lines of code, and I also got access to variables. But nested loops are considered far better when it comes to writing code that deals with multidimensional data. Another thing that you could do is, if you're using a dictionary, you can pretty print it. So let me just show you. Let me just call it data, in which keys are the name of the person and values are their, let's say that they're spending. So how much money did they spend on each of the transactions that they made? So let's say $88, $65, $20, $55. Jane, on the other hand, spent, let's say, $10, but then there was another transaction in which she spent more than $10. So she spent 15, 20, 12, and 25. And this was a transaction within a transaction. So she had bought something, but it had multiple parts, and these were the prices of those. So what you could do now is you can loop over these keys, and each element can be compared and thought, okay, if it's a list, then I will loop over this and print out all the values. This is also called flattening a list. So you can perform a lot of tasks like this. There are many other ways of dealing with loops, but nested loops are quite important when you're dealing with multidimensional data, as we have just seen that when we have multidimensional lists, there are lists nested inside other lists, then we deal with those. Also, there's no requirement that you have to use for loops inside other for loops. You can nest loop and mix and match those. So I can use a while loop inside a for loop that is nested inside a while loop. You don't really have to nest 2 loops. You can go really deep, but the problem with going really deep with the nested loop is that you don't know how much complicated it could get, and then at which level, if any, the error arrives. So we need to be very careful when doing that. So basic principle is don't go too deep with the nested loops, and don't use loops that you don't need. So if you need a for loop, then use a for loop. If you need a while loop, then use a while loop. Don't complicate these things. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. And as promised, we'd like to discuss some of the resources through which you can learn these things. Whenever we are learning new things, a quote that always keeps you motivated is an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. So if you're learning something new and you are getting stuck at a particular problem, such as you're trying to learn a new programming language and you get stuck at a particular error, we have a community site, intellipaat.com/community. You are more than welcome to check us out there, and you will have people who are like-minded, who are who you could consider your peers, who have dealt with these technologies and have dealt with the problems that you are describing right now. So you can go to that site, post down your question, put as many details about the questions that you are putting as possible, such as the code, the error code, the problems solution that you have tried, the solutions that did not work, and whatever else is relevant in that context. We also have a blog, intellipaat.com/blog, in which you can visit and take a look at the content that we have produced. There's a lot of free content for you to browse through. It will give you information about technologies, comparing technologies, interview questions, when to use a particular technology. There's a lot of tutorials there as well. We also have a YouTube channel on which you can take a look at some of the free courses that we have released. We release content every day, and most of it deals with technology. So you can take a look at those as well and learn something new. If you wish to learn a new programming language, there's a lot of content there as well. If you wish to get certified and get ahead in your career, then maybe these are not the best options. And for that, we would recommend you to take a look at one of our courses. So if you are interested in Python, as I suspect you might be since you've taken a look at a loops or nested loops problem in Python, you can take a look at Python data science course and training, in which we teach you Python as well as data science. So data science is one of the most important fields right now. Python is by far one of the most popular languages to perform data science operations in. So we recommend that you use Python to learn data science. And you can take a look at this course. Yes, this is a course that is one of our highly rated courses. And you get 39 hours of instructor-led training, 24 hours of self-paced videos, 50 hours of project works and exercises, just so that you get everything under your belt that you need in order to become a software developer or a data scientist. Python penetrates quite a wide variety of fields, so you can take a look at different fields and choose which one's best for you. If you feel like it's data science, then you can take a look at this. We have a student satisfaction rate of 4.9 out of 5, and we have certain course overviews as well, so you can take a look at these if you wish to get a better understanding of what the course offers. We cover the skills of probability, statistics, machine learning, programming, data manipulation, data visualization, object-oriented programming in Python, and dimensionality reduction, time series forecasting, and much more. We provide self-paced as well as trainer-based learning. So if you want to learn things at your own pace, you can take a look at the self-paced training. If you want to have one-to-one interaction with a trainer, we provide ways of doing this, which is online classes. So you can take a look at those as well. You can take a look at the curriculum that we offer and figure out what are the things that we offer that you can use and upskill yourself. You can take a look at the projects that we provide. You can also take a look at the certification of completion. After you have completed the course with the required grade, then you get a certification. This certification is valid in many MNCs. You can take a look at the reviews that we have gotten from people. And if you have any questions, you can take a look at the FAQ section. In case the FAQ section doesn't answer your question, I'll let you know another place where you can ask questions. But before that, thank you so much for sticking around with us. We would like to give you a coupon code of YouTube 30. This coupon code gets you 30% flat off on any of the courses that we have discussed. YouTube 30 is going to be valid for a short period of time. So we recommend that you make use of it as quickly as possible. And this will get you a flat 30% off on any of the courses. This is especially for our YouTube viewers. Now, thank you so much for joining us. In case your questions that you have were not answered in the FAQ section of our courses, of any of our courses, or anywhere on our website, you can contact us in the numbers that I have mentioned here. You can contact us in India or in US. In case these numbers, you are not more of a talking person, if you're more of an email person, then you can take a look at sales@intellipaat.com. You can drop us a mail and our course advisors will get in touch with you whenever it suits you. Our course advisors are there to help you out 24/7. So in case you have any issues regarding the courses that we offer, regarding the content that we offer, if you wish to learn something new and you're not sure what course you should pick from our course library, you can contact with our course advisor and they'll tell you and help you understand which course is the best for your current situation, depending on your education level, the experience you have, and many others. Our advisors are there for you 24/7. So in case you wish to contact them at any time or drop us a mail if you wish to schedule a meeting with them at a specific time. So with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us and we'll see you next time. Thank you.